people online forever. It's a great opportunity. Good. Yes.
Was last week's stream?
I don't think so. I think we were in retreat, so it was just Soryu. Yes, so good. Okay, good.
Position the microphone.
So we're live.
What?
So we're live.
Okay. Should I begin? Okay. It's fine. Just fine. Yeah. So on a very practical note, and don't be annoyed if I continue to say this for months into the future. That's usually what we need to change our habits. But let's try to fill in from the front back. Because otherwise, if you sit in the back, then when people come and sit in the front, which people do, then I can't see you anymore. And then people start moving around during the sitting, and so it's easier if we fill in from the front. Now, there's some reason that you want to sit in the back, that's fine. If you have a reason, then that's different.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's slippery on the floor, I guess.
All right, so let's begin with some silence. Um, so today, I will talk in a little bit of paradox. I hope it doesn't seem like hypocrisy. As far as I can tell, it's not hypocrisy, but it may feel like paradox. The basic point that I'd like to make today is that spiritual traditions, which have a vast variety, can basically be put on a certain spectrum between traditions that give ultimate authority to beliefs and systems that give ultimate authority to experience. These two systems need each other, but those that give ultimate authority to experience are the source of peace. So that means that as we practice, we want to give final authority to direct experience rather than a certain way of looking at things, which is what you think of as a belief. A belief is a certain way of looking at things. The word for this in classical Buddhism is drishti, or ditti, which means view or perspective. And some of you who do yoga based in the asana tradition, which means certain postures of the body, which is one kind of yoga. I think in the West, it's more or less considered to be all of yoga, but in fact, it's just one part of yoga. May be familiar with this word drishti, probably not the Pali version of it, because that's the term that's used for focusing your eyes on something. So looking at something without wavering is drishti. You use that term? So in the same way that in English we can use the word view to mean literally a view of a landscape or a certain perspective on things. I'm looking at that wall from a certain perspective. You can also use the word to mean something more abstract, a perspective in terms of a philosophical perspective, a view in terms of a social view. So the point that I'm making is that as we practice, we do not give ultimate authority to views, to perspectives, to ways of looking at things. Instead, we give ultimate authority to our direct experience. And the reason this might seem paradoxical to you, as you listen, you might wonder if I really am in a position to say that, because what I'm providing to you right now as I speak is in fact a way of looking at things. It's a perspective, it's a view. However, note that I didn't say that views and perspectives and ways of looking at things are bad things that you should get rid of. I didn't say that. On the contrary, I said that the traditions that have a mystical or experience-based core need views just as much as traditions that have views need a mystical core. So the I guess one more thing I'll say before I get into the heart of the talk is that this sort of thing, this sort of talk that I'm giving isn't always the most fun kind of talk to either give or listen to. Sometimes we like talks that are more narrative-based rather than information-based. We like narrative, we like story. But it's these views that carry the greatest power in the world. The whole world, whole earth right now, is being controlled more and more by human beliefs, by the way people see things, by the human imagination. So more and more things that don't really exist are controlling the world that actually exists. And we nowadays as human beings refer to things as the real world that are imaginary. So when we talk about money or getting a job, working at a company, these are completely imaginary phenomena. There isn't really money. Money doesn't really exist. It's a completely imaginary phenomena. Does that make sense? Money isn't a real thing. It's something that people invented. It's imaginary. We all agreed to live by it, and because we all agree to live by it, it has enormous power over human beings, and because it has such power over human beings have power, and so we control the world. The same thing with a company. A company isn't something that exists. We made the Center for Mindful Learning, which I'm now attempting to rebrand as the Community for the Experience and Development of Awakening and Responsibility, or CEDAR, more of a community than a center. We made the Center for Mindful Learning. How? How did it get made? Well, simple. We went to the Vermont state government and told them that we thought it up. And they said, oh, great. Well, in that case, we'll write it on a piece of paper. And now it exists. It just exists like that. And because it's completely imaginary, and because they who are in charge believe in it, everyone is expected to believe in it. And if we do something wrong, then they can take away our nonprofit status, and then the company, the organization, the incorporation just vanishes. It's just gone. But we forget that it was never there. Just an idea that people agreed to believe in because that's what the law prescribes. But wait, what's this law thing? The law also doesn't exist. It's something that human beings invented. We made it up, and it changes. You can just change it. People agree to change the law, and then it just changes, just like that. Or if you walk over a border, yes, you can go over a border to another place where there are different laws, right? But wait, the border, it's not there. You understand? Have you tried to look for it? Maybe you've gone over to Canada. If you look on the ground, you'll see that there is no border. It's an agreement. It's a fictional agreement that people have collectively become attached to, and therefore we live by it. And again, these imaginary phenomena, money, companies, nations, things that don't exist, things that, or you could say that only exist in the human imagination. These relatively few conceptual phenomena have gained control over the human mind. The human mind controls the human being, and therefore the human species. And therefore our species can work together and can gain enormous power over life on Earth, which is exactly what has happened. We now have extraordinary power over life on Earth, but you have to ask, do we? Who has that power? Well, no one. The imaginary beliefs have that power. Things that only exist because they parasitize our minds and prevent us from seeing clearly and have no compassion. They're not beings that love. They're just mental patterns that reproduce. So we live in a world that's controlled with extraordinary brutality by certain views, certain perspectives. And that's the reason that we need them, because views, human beliefs, human mental patterns that are shared amongst large numbers of people are currently the lords, the leaders of the resources of this planet. They control, they allocate resources, they decide who lives and who dies. They decide how we live, how we relate to each other. And it's because beliefs, views, perspectives, ways of looking at things have so much power that it's essential that we make use of them. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm providing to you a way of looking at things. And I'm intentionally providing it to you because I think it's very important for our community to have a certain way of looking at things. I think that in the past several years, we've been very much experience-based, which has been great. But a community, in order to work together, needs to have certain ways of looking at things that are agreed upon. So that's what I'm providing now. However, a mature and peaceful, harmless, beneficial belief system is one that is designed from the bottom to free people from itself. Because the belief system is fictional, it's delusional. And we want to awaken people to the truth. Because it's also possible for very mature people to work together without a belief system, without deluding themselves. Because it's possible to awaken to the truth. And when people have awakened to the truth, then they can work together in ways that have nothing to do with beliefs or preferences, or liking each other, or disliking each other, or agreeing with each other, or disagreeing with each other. All of that is lost. And we cooperate with each other in the same way that the clouds cooperate with the blue sky. There just isn't a conflict there from the beginning. So we want a belief system that frees us from that very belief system. And in ideal cases, we want a belief system that is compelling enough to rob resources from other belief systems, and also, ultimately, once it has gathered those resources, free us from even itself. This is the highest form of belief system, of way of looking at things. So what you want is a system that has beliefs. That belief system is so compelling that the resources of the world can be gathered by it. Now, what are the resources of the world? In fact, there's really just one resource of the world that matters. All the other resources of the world are subservient to this one. I don't have a sense of what I would say is the #1 most valuable resource in the world.
You call yourself?
I don't know that I'd call it a resource, because I don't know that that's limited in any way. But it's a good point. And it may be connected to what I'm saying. You may actually be meaning what I mean, but the higher self is a term that I myself don't really understand. So I'm not sure. But I would say it's human attention. Human attention is extremely limited. We don't have a way of replicating it. You can publish a book and then you can publish a lot of books, but we don't have a way of increasing the amount of attention that we can have. You have one moment of attention. That's all you have. You can't have more than that. So human attention is the most powerful and most limited resource. And is the one resource that belief systems can gather, can acquire, and control. The belief systems are valuable because they can gather human attention and control it. A good belief system, or the ideal belief system, is one that will gather human attention away from other belief systems. Now, a lot of belief systems have that quality. That first step is one that a lot of belief systems have. A lot of belief systems can take your attention and then control it. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But there are very, very few belief systems that are mature enough to gather your attention away from other belief systems and then thereby freeing your attention from all those belief systems, and then finally free you from the final thing that is controlling you, namely that belief system. So our attention is controlled by various belief systems. We want a system that will gather our attention away from those, thereby freeing us from them, and then finally free us even from that. And that would be liberation, and we are then in a position to cooperate in a way that is not fundamentally based on beliefs, or you could say delusions, but on the contrary is based on the truth, or you could say love. And that is then the source of world peace. So we can ask, okay, sounds interesting, sounds good, and are there any? Do any such belief systems exist? And the answer is definitely, absolutely. That's the good news. Then you might say, well, which ones? Yes, we can take. Let's take the pie of human beliefs, of human spiritual traditions. Yes. The world spiritual tradition is our pie, and we're going to cut it up so that we can determine which pieces have this quality of successfully gathering your attention away from others and then freeing you even from that one. And so we divide up the pie, and one slice might be, say, Christianity. Yes? Christianity could be one slice of the pie. Another slice of the pie might be, say, Hinduism. I don't really know what shape that slice is, but we'll just say it's a slice of the pie in this multi-dimensional pie. Maybe that piece is 5 or 6 dimensional. And then you can go to, say, shamanism, whatever that is. Now we're really getting into some confusing territory. Is that a tradition? Who knows? Okay, fine, and let's keep going into some other traditions, which I think are very much worth mentioning. Some other spiritual traditions. So science, modern science, is a spiritual tradition that came from the Greek philosophical tradition through the Islamic world to what we call the European Renaissance or Enlightenment into the modern day. That's a spiritual tradition with its own beliefs and views, ways of looking at things. It's been very successful over the centuries at competing with other traditions and gathering people's attention so that people see the world through that lens. What are some others? Well, another one that's very, very common and also important to know as a spiritual, religious belief system is something called humanism, which is to say that in modern times, it's very, very common to think that human beings are the center of the world, that human beings are the givers of meaning in the world. So what should run the world is human feelings. How people feel about things is what should be most important. And this one, as I said last week, is so very common that we often don't know that it is a religion that we follow. We don't even realize it. And so it's important to make this clear so that you can see it, because this is the most dangerous spiritual tradition on earth right now. And I think everyone in the room is a follower of this religious cult. And so everyone in this room is one of the most dangerous people alive. So what does it mean to say humanism? Well, in terms of humanism, first and foremost, if you're not hurting anyone, you should be able to do what you want. Now, that's a very important thing to consider. And that's very important in humanism. And it's something that at the monastery we deal with every day, because people nowadays really, really want to do what they want to do, and feel that they have the right to do what they want to do. And it took years for me to cure myself of this mental illness, that I should be able to do what I want, just because I want to do it. I should have the right of self-determination. Something that my mother here knows I make jokes about all the time, because my nephew, her grandson, is still 2, yes? How many months how old is he?
2 2/3.
2 2/3. So for the past year or so, he has been wanting to do things that he isn't allowed to do, right? Isn't it about the past year that's really become an issue? Really wants to do things that he isn't allowed to do. Like eat pieces of glass, eat broken glass. He's very interested in that, right?
Yep.
That seems like a great idea. It's pretty, and it would be fun. And my mother, among other people, but she's here. So my mother prevents him from doing what he wants to do. And I then look at her, shocked, and say, what are you doing? He's a human being. He has the right of self-determination. Doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he shouldn't have to get into that car seat. He doesn't want to get in the car seat. On the contrary, he wants to climb out of the car window. Yes?
Yeah.
So what are you doing? You're cruel. You're not allowing a human being to do what a human being wants to do, and that's evil. And it's funny to say in the case of a little kid, but in my experience, having done the training that I did, I don't think that there's a very large difference in maturity between a 2-year-old and a 40-year-old. There just isn't a very big difference. And so why should we have the right of self-determination? It's an extremely important question, and once we actually start to look at it, most of us find it extremely offensive. Of course, if you look at it in a philosophical way, it's one thing. But if you actually were to come and live at the monastery for a month or so, then you'd very quickly realize how deeply we believe that we should be able to do what we want to do. And that if you're going to prevent me, then you're my enemy. So it's manifest in lots of different ways, such as phrases that we have, like the customer is always right. So how do you know that a product should be made? Simple. People want to buy it. That's why it should be made. And that runs our society. Who should lead? Whoever people vote for. People should decide that. The masses should decide what they want, and then you do that. Whatever it is that a lot of people want is the right thing to do. So we have these various traditions. From Christianity to humanism. And it's important for us to ask, which ones are the best ones? Which ones are the ones that successfully gather our people's attention from the others and then liberate us from even that one? And so you're looking at the pie and you see it divided up in all these pieces, lots of different traditions. And we're wondering which one. And I would say that if you divide the pie up that way, you'll actually never find the correct answer to the question. There is a correct answer to the question, but you won't find it. The way I would divide up the pie isn't in slices this way. I would divide up the pie, this is the whole pie, and then I'd divide it up with a circular piece right in the middle. And the middle of the pie, that is the piece of the pie, which has actually a part of all of those traditions in it. So you divide up this way, but then you make another cut in the middle of it, and that part of each of those pieces, which is to say the mystical core of each of those pieces, is the part that successfully gathers people's attention and then liberates it from even that tradition. Now, obviously, I believe also that different slices of those pies have different success rates at preserving the mystical core. And furthermore, I believe, as you know, no reason for me to hide it because this represents it, that Buddhism has done the best job of that by far in human history. Preserving the mystical core and being sure that the mystics have real power over the direction of the tradition. But all traditions have it. And it's our job, whether it's science or Buddhism or Christianity or humanism or Hinduism or whatever it is, it's our job to consistently be striving to receive and understand the beliefs of that tradition, but then search for the core of it. What is the direct experience that somebody had that informed their structuring of that belief system? So someone had a direct experience. Out of that direct experience came a pedagogy, which became a belief system, social structures, administrative patterns, et cetera, et cetera. Our job is to take all of that and follow it back to the mystical core. Now, this is confusing for us. It's very hard for us to do this as human beings because we spend so much of our lives in delusion, in an imaginary world, and we even call it the real world. So it's hard for us, and it can be very painful for us actually to try to do it. It can be very stressful. So it's important for us to have a community that supports us in doing that. So just briefly, I want to say that that exploration can really be difficult, and it can feel frightening. And when we're going through it, especially if we've had a difficult past, traumatic, for example, past, it can be very confusing to go through that. And in fact, this is really what's meant when we talk about the dark night. The dark night of the soul is a phrase that originated in medieval Christianity, and with a saint called John of the Cross, because he followed the Catholic system, and he followed it all the way to a direct experience of the truth. And as he began to directly encounter the truth, he realized that the system that had brought him to the truth wasn't true. And that is very painful. The system that brought him to the truth isn't true. It's very confusing, because what do you trust then? How do you move forward at that point? And he eventually resolved it, as most of us do. But I want to bring this up because I want to give you permission to, at some point, struggle. It's okay if, as we go through this process, we go through the dark night, we go through a deep insecurity in which we don't know who or what we can trust. It seems like everything isn't trustworthy. If at that point we go searching outside and go wandering around looking for an escape from this insecurity and confusion, then we'll only descend deeper into it and make it harder and harder for us to escape from it. It's very important, if we get to that point, to continue on until we ourselves get to the point when we, as St. John did, can integrate that which is true with that which isn't, and find what in Buddhism is called the middle way between suffering and liberation, and walk that way, walk that path, resolving the apparent conflict between belief-based and experience-based spirituality. So this is our chance now to explore that for ourselves and pay attention to our own direct experience. Take a moment to adjust your posture, or find a posture that's both tall, upright, alert, and calm, settled, relaxed. Always feel free to readjust your posture as this session continues. At any time that you wish, feel free to move, find a posture that's more balanced, more comfortable. Feel free to straighten up, lifting tall, and also settle in. It's okay if again and again, as you move through this hour, you're readjusting your bodily posture. It isn't necessary to intentionally hold yourself in perfect stillness. Of course, if you'd like to remain still, that's fine, but there's no need to make yourself be still. And begin this session with a story. A story about yourself, a story about your life, a story about your purpose in life. Tell the story of your life. What are you doing? What do you want to do with your life? What's your purpose? What's your vow? And this doesn't have to be something new that you're coming up with right now. We all have a story that we tell. You may want to start simply by telling the story that you tend to tell about your life, whatever that is. Identify with whatever you identify with. Talk about in your mind whatever you want. Basically, this isn't particularly different from any usual daydream that we might be having. So usually when people tell you to meditate and you get distracted, simply do that right now. Get distracted by your stories about your life. Maybe someone did something to you that you didn't like. And so you feel bad for yourself. Well, good, then start with that story. I'm a victim. But I don't want to be a victim. And so my goal is to find a way out of this. I don't know how to do that. So my goal is to learn how to do that. And that way we're just telling the stories that we always tell. The only difference is that now we're doing it on purpose. We're doing it consciously. So for me, not that this should be your story, in fact, it shouldn't be. Each of us has our own, but just to give you an example, it can be useful to hear an example, not in order to replicate it, but simply in order to get a sense. For me, my purpose in life is to save life, to preserve life on this planet. That's what I've dedicated myself to. And I iterate that and reiterate that, elaborate, confirm, clarify. And I acknowledge that as far as I can tell, the greatest danger to life on earth is the human mind. And so I created a community whose purpose is to purify the human mind so that the human being becomes something that loves and protects life rather than ignores and destroys it. And I clarify that to myself. And that's the story that I'm telling. But each of us has our own story, so clarify that. What do you live for? Clarify that story. Intentionally tell that story so that it's as compelling, inspiring, detailed, beautiful, and realistic as possible. Again, if you find yourself getting distracted, immediately assume that you're not distracted. That whatever you're distracted by is just one more part of your story. One more part of the story that you tell about yourself in the world. So make use of it. Listen to that story and retell it intentionally to make it inspiring and detailed and realistic. And if you'd like, transform it into something that you'd rather be telling, to a different story. As you tell this story, tell it with your thoughts. Talk to yourself. You may see images in your mind of your life, your past, your future. But also feel. Pay attention to how this story makes you feel. And again, remember that if you get distracted, assume that the distraction is actually part of the technique. You're distracted by some part of your story that needs to be explored right now. Take a look at what thoughts and also emotions are associated with that, so that you can tell it both in your mind and in your body in a way that's more inspiring. In a minute, I'll ring the bell and begin to walk around, inside or outside, as a person who's living out this story. But as you walk, over the 5 minutes that we'll be walking, begin to experiment with what it would be like to walk around as someone who does not live this story, a person who is not defined by this story. Experiment with that as you walk around. Begin by walking around, exploring the world as that person who's living out the story that you just told. And then see what happens over 5 minutes as you let go of that. Walk around as someone who does not identify with that story. And in 5 minutes, I'll ring the bell again, and then we'll return to our seats.
As you return to your seated position, reestablish your posture. Once again, find an upright and tall, settled and relaxed posture. And attend to the story of your life. More or less, whatever you think about anything is a part of this, fits into this. But now, as you attend to the story, rather than paying attention to the content of the story, rather than making it as compelling as possible, pay attention to the story as sensory experience. Which is to say that as you're looking at the images in your mind that are located around or in front of your closed eyes, the images of your past or your future, notice that those are images. What you're paying attention to is not what's happening. It's not what happened, and it's not what will happen.
What happened is somewhat different. What will happen is somewhat different. And what's happening right now is you're sitting in a room with no story happening at all. So when you see those images, know that they are mental images and look at them as mental images. That's the whole assignment. Simply notice that that is imaginary. When you hear a story in your mind, hearing commentary or thoughts about yourself or others, listen to that as a voice in your head. That's what you're listening to. You're listening to sounds in your mind. And as you listen to that story, simply remember, know clearly, this is imaginary. This is adding an imaginary world to the world. That's all. Simply acknowledge that. What is this? This is a sensory experience. It's a voice, it's talk, it's chatter in my mind. Just as imagining, remembering, fantasizing, planning, those are images in my mind, and those images, just like that talk, is my imagination. This is imaginary, and furthermore, the feelings, the subjective emotional sensations associated with those thoughts, the feelings we have about ourselves and others and past and future and right and wrong and good and bad, those feelings, those emotions, it's not that they're not there. It's simply that they are body sensations. The thing that we think is bad, we think it's bad because we have a bad feeling about it. But that bad feeling isn't in the thing. The bad feeling is in our own subjective experience. Just to say that it's not bad on its own side. We have added that to the situation. We think it's good. It's not good on its own side. Those experiences, those emotions are happening in our own bodies. They're subjective. They're imaginary. It doesn't mean that the thoughts or the emotions aren't happening. They are happening. But what is happening? Our imagination is happening. And all we do is remember. This is what mindfulness is. It's remembering. We remember that what we see in our minds are images that we're seeing in our minds. We remember that as we're looking at them. The talk in our minds, we remember, this is talk in my mind. The feelings in our bodies, we remember, these are feelings in my body. So continue to pay attention to the story, but remember that these thoughts and emotions are thoughts and emotions. Once again, continue to pay attention to your story, the story of your life, your enunciation of your purpose, your identity, your place in the world. As you pay attention to that, notice that thoughts about yourself and your life, your past and your future, are imaginary. They're thoughts. And notice that the emotions, the feelings in your body, are feelings in your body. They're also part of this imaginary story. It doesn't mean we try to get rid of them. It means that as we experience them, we know them for what they are. Thoughts are thoughts. Emotions are emotions. And as you explore that, you may come into contact with a kind of meaning that is not dependent upon a story. So this is the time for questions, conversation, discussion. Investigation of the subject of the talk or the process of the meditation. Anything is fine, so feel free to make use of this time as you wish.
It's all imaginary. It's great.
Did it seem that way?
Yeah.
That most of your experience is imaginary?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Most of us live in an imaginary world most of the time. Mm-hmm. True. And did it feel good to notice that it was imaginary?
It felt very good.
Good. Did it feel nihilistic?
No.
Okay, good. A lot of the time when people notice this, it feels quite nihilistic.
Mm.
Feels as if all of the meaning that I've been living by is gone and there's no meaning left. So it's very good that you didn't have that experience, possibly because you have such an advanced practice. You didn't only lose the imaginary, you probably also came into contact with something that isn't dependent on your imagination. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
What was your experience as you noticed that it was all imaginary?
Belief.
Right. And wouldn't that be a kind of significance, a kind of pleasure, a kind of ease that's not dependent on the story?
Yeah.
So there you are. A lot of the time we have trouble identifying that because it's not part of a story. We can't tell a story about it. But if that's the only way we know how to identify things, then it feels abstract and distant. But for you, it's obviously quite tangible. So that's wonderful.
Okay.
Yes, it's very, very good. And it's highly significant to the world situation. To be able to share that, to bring this back into story, to be able to share that kind of relief with people, that's a kind of relief that doesn't depend on winning and losing. Doesn't depend on somebody being right and someone else being wrong. And so it's the source of peace.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to feel it, to let it fill your body and to share it just as you just did. So thank you for doing that.
I noticed that physical pain is much more interesting when you stop labeling it as pain.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so quick that it's hard to break the reaction.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, physical pain, as you say, is, you said the word interesting, right? It's much more interesting when you don't label it as pain. Yeah, that's right. And you're exactly right also. It's very quick. It's incredibly fast. Human beings so quickly and automatically add on an imaginary world to direct experience that we often don't know that we're doing it. We think it's the real world, and then we're surprised when people don't see the world the way we do, because we're looking at the real world. We don't notice that we're looking at an imaginary world most of the time. And then other people live in their own imaginary world. It's not surprising that we have trouble getting along. But just as you say, you can notice that. It is possible. And the way that we talk about it is that there is the physical pain, yes? And that has its own kind of discomfort. It's not that pain stops being pain. Pain is still pain. But the difference is that that pain is present, and generally we add on a story to it, which is also painful. We have emotions about the physical pain, and those emotions are also painful. The story, the emotions associated with it, add their own kind of discomfort. So we started off with this much discomfort, and that's still there, but then we added on more pain, discomfort around it. So now we have more difficulty, and often that's enough difficulty that it's overwhelming, and it feels like it's crushing us. It's injuring us. But if we can let go of that added pain, then just as you say, the remaining physical pain can actually be a source of growth, can be interesting. It may be teaching us something. There may be something important there. Even if it's merely the lesson of impermanence. A lesson that we are impermanent, that our bodies, our minds, our possessions, our relationships are impermanent. So this technique absolutely allows you to distinguish the physical pain from the story of the pain, which is also painful and increases the total pain, often to the point of reaching overwhelm. It's very good that you see that. I think the most important thing you say is that it's so quick. How quick was it? Good. That's a good explanation. Yep, it's like that.
I got a question. When you said in your talk that that way you were thinking was like a mental illness, and that you were glad that you got to the point to where you were able to basically rid yourself of that. Was that the? Tell me again what that was, so I understand it. Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of different mental illnesses.
Yeah.
So I'm not. This isn't the sum total.
No.
But I often say something, and I know capable historians who agree with me about this, scholars. So I feel confident in this view. If you were to go to medieval Europe, which is where I suppose most or all of us came from in our heritage, in this particular room. If you were to go to medieval Europe and ask people there, are you religious? Are you a religious person? Do you come from a religious family? Yes? They would say, no. No, of course not. We don't believe in any religion. We're Christians. Of course we're not religious. We believe in the truth because Christianity is the way it is. It's not a belief system. It's a description of reality. Nowadays, we don't see it that way. We think of Christianity as a religion. That's just how we see it now. We feel that there may be other ways of looking at things, and Christianity is an optional interpretation, right? Now, it's important to know that that itself is an optional interpretation, but it's also important to know that the people who are saying that have their own religion, which they refer to as not a religion. And at this particular time, the thing that we don't call a religion, but which in fact is a religion that's running our lives, is worshiping the human being, human feelings, human experience. Human experience seems to us as the final authority in terms of determining what we should do and what meaning there is in the universe. So, for example, when we ask, should a certain species or ecosystem be preserved? How do we decide that?
Based on the value that it has to us.
Exactly. So immediately, without noticing, it's quick, right? Quick, boom, right away. The question is, from the human perspective, what utility is present? Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And that is a worship of the human being at a level that we believe that we now are God, that we have the right to determine what lives and what dies, because we know what value there is. The value is determined by the value we ascribe according to our experience. Again, you have the examples I gave about voting, about purchasing. Again, I think the best example, which is given by a scholar named Yuval Harari, I think his example is actually most useful in this. If let's say that nowadays, someone is married to someone else and develops a romantic interest in a third person, okay? Then they would go to our modern version of a priest, a therapist, and a counselor of some kind, a psychologist or something, and go to them and say, this is my situation. I'm in a relationship with this person, but at this point, I'm more interested in this person. Of course, therapists are different, but the general trend, because we're not really talking about specific instances, we're talking about the general trend of our society. The therapist will eventually get to saying something like, well, how do you feel about this? How do you think the other people feel about it? What is your experience with this? Do you feel good, bad? How would you like to make your decisions according to your ability to determine your own future, according to your own experience, on and on like that? The final authority is your thoughts and emotions, the value that you ascribe to certain experiences. Let's say we go back to medieval Europe. Someone is married to someone else. They develop a romantic interest with a third person, and they go to their priest. They say, I was married to so-and-so, but at this point I have an interest in this other person. There's absolutely no interest in what that individual feels. That has no authority in the situation. According to the tradition, the scripture, the interpretation of that scripture by religious authorities, once you're married, and it's your problem. You have a problem. You need to resolve your own immaturity. You need to overcome lust. That's your job. And the priest wouldn't even think to ask, how do you feel? What do you think your future should be? What do these people, how do they interpret these traditions and their emotions? What course of action would cause the greatest good for the most people? It has nothing to do with any of that. It's just God is the authority. Scripture is the authoritative vehicle by which we understand God's will. And it's our job to accord with that. That is meaning in this world. So God is the center of things, not human beings. You can go to other societies, of course. I'm just giving one. Medieval Europe, of course, is just one, not a particularly important one, frankly, in terms of world history. But it's one that we're connected to, and I know, and probably you're familiar with it. I gave the example because if I give the example of medieval India or Aboriginal Australia or something, probably we wouldn't laugh the way we did, because we have a sense of what it was like at that time. And we look down on it. We call it the Dark Ages. That was a really depressing period as far as we're concerned, because people couldn't do what they wanted to do. It was a serfdom. It was feudalism, and we didn't have cell phones. It was terrible. You couldn't call whoever you wanted whenever you wanted, and it isn't merely that it was dreary. It actually was sort of offensive. It was an offensive period. It was against progress and was narrow-minded, and those are the stories that we tell. So to me, the mental illness that I was somewhat cured of by many kind people who put up with me while I was trying to get over it, was the worship of the human being in general and of my desires in particular.
Okay.
And as I say, humanism is, as far as I can tell, the most dangerous, the most damaging religion that has ever existed on the face of the earth. It is what is causing the destruction of life more than any other. I have full sympathy for the Christian groups in the middle of our country that don't believe in us East Coast elites who think we're so smart, because they didn't make this problem. Medieval Europe prevented capitalism for 500 years. We are 500 years, if it wasn't for the efforts of Christianity, we would be 500 years further along the destruction of life. There would be countless species that would already be gone. Nuclear war may have already happened. I mean, we have to feel enormous gratitude. At least I do. You don't have to, but I do. I can't help but feel enormous gratitude for the efforts of that worldview. So as we attempt to move through it, the question is there another way? Is there some other thing that we would place at the highest authority above human experience? human preference. And to me, that's what this path does. I should say also that we really like to blame religion for all those other religions for war, especially the Abrahamic traditions. Mm-hmm. Oh, those Muslims are so warlike, and oh, those fundamentalist Christians are such jerks. At least we on the coasts of this country really like to make a big deal about that. But if you consider the most destructive wars of all of human history were fought in the name of humanism, which is to say World Wars I and II. Those were wars that were fought between different sects of humanists. So there was the liberal humanist, which is us. There's the communist humanist. So that, you know who that is?
Fascist.
Yeah, fascism is actually slightly different. Fascism is more of an interpretation of government. But yes, there were fascist communist countries. It's not necessary that a communist group be fascist, but that did happen. And then the evolutionary humanists, who were the Nazis. So these are different interpretations of what it is for human beings to be at the center of the universe. And in the same way that different Abrahamic traditions fight with each other, different humanist sects fight with each other, and caused far more suffering and destruction than any other religion has ever achieved. So it's very important for us to, as I say, to really question what we mean when we talk about secular humanism. And it's very hard for us to do that. And I know that me saying this on camera is quite dangerous because the forces of our society may come together to resist such an interpretation. But I believe it's very important that we acknowledge that in our community so that we can see it clearly and ultimately move beyond it. Because there is something, I can say clearly that there's something far more significant that has higher authority than the human being. Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify how the human attention is the most powerful resource?
Mm.
It just seems to me like water or money are also very powerful.
Of course, absolutely. So water and money are two different kinds of resources, first of all. Okay? Mm-hmm. Water is a physical object that exists in an objective way. Mm-hmm. Money is not an object. It only exists in a subjective way. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's more powerful in society.
Well, and for that reason, it's more powerful in society. So those are two different kinds of resources. So let's take them one at a time. The easy one to talk about is money. So you can say that money is more powerful than human attention, but it's easy to make the logical argument that if money only exists because people pay attention to it, mm-hmm. if all of the power of money is derived from the degree and method by which people pay attention to it. So how much and in what way do we pay attention to it? That's how it's created and that's how it controls us. And it's literally the human mind, that human attention is the foundation of money. So therefore, human attention is a more fundamental resource than money. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. If we change the way we paid attention, we could find a different, and we have in the past, this isn't theoretical, many societies, most human societies haven't had money. Mm-hmm. So we know for certain that money isn't necessary, that we could change the way we look at things and money would disappear. So we know that human attention is more powerful than money. Okay? Why is it a more valuable resource than water? Well, it's only, in that case, it's only because of the way the world is now. It's more powerful than water because human beings, when there isn't enough water somewhere nowadays, that is a problem that's caused by human beings, by choices that we've made, by our economy, for example. So the way human beings make choices are causing the problems that we have. And for that reason, human attention is the fundamental issue. If we could change the way we pay attention, we would change the way we manage, the way we allocate the resource of water, and that would solve the problem. So that isn't inherent in the way that money is, but it is conditional and is the case now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for example, let's say that there's a problem with water. So for me, I was in India. I did a lot of work around water because the part of India I was in had water problems. And so we looked at the problem, right? Well, in the part of India where I was, there were 5 large rivers. There was enough water. Yes? But we weren't getting it. And in particular, the way they allocated water was they just diverted the water to one village or area for a day. And then there was some unknown number of days when there was no water. All of the pipes would have water in them. There were not even the spigots on the pipes. It would just start flowing and it would flood the streets. And it was everyone's job to gather together all of the containers that they had and just go and fill up water and bring it back to your house and store it and go back, and there'd be lines. And we had a huge cistern that we would fill. And so you'd be filling up water and bringing it back to your house. And then if everyone filled up all their containers, they still wouldn't turn off the water. It would just flood. Yes? So then that would be a problem. And then there'd be an unknown period of days when there would be no water. You wouldn't know when you'd have water again. So we wanted to solve that problem. It was a big problem. A real problem. This is a major health concern. I just want to be clear that what we were dealing with was an extremely problematic issue that was causing death on a daily basis. Okay, very significant. What did we do? Well, it was what we're doing nowadays. We had a media campaign. We tried to bring attention to the issue. Yes, we knew that if we could bring attention to the issue and describe a solution that people would be compelled to act by, we would solve the problem. Yes, so we weren't creating more water. We were changing the way people thought about water, the way people considered the situation. So we changed, we made use of the resource of human attention. A problem with something that's more fundamental than our views on politics or on health or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great. So that's a great segue into what we can do to improve the world. So are there any announcements about ways that we can this week have an impact on our society? Of course, it doesn't have to be this week.
So it is
Yes,
now.
please. Can you stand up and do it?
Sure. So it's now summer, which means it's sunscreen season. And one of the things that is common in sunscreen is synthetic fragrance. It can cause problems for people in the community, Soryu. So if you are wearing sunscreen or buying sunscreen, make sure that you look at the ingredients list and make sure that there isn't fragrance listed in the ingredients list. As a way of taking care of the community.
Anything else? Are there others? Okay. Anything else?
So there's CML stuff, but I don't know if there's anything else first about something going on here in Burlington. Share a lot.
I can tell you that this this is a time when it's very important to speak out politically, and so I'd recommend that you encourage yourself and encourage the people you know to continue to be engaged. A lot of the choices that are being made that in fact are oppressing people, causing destruction, endangering us. A lot of those choices that are being made in politics have caused a considerable resistance. And it's important to keep our engagement alive. So remember, every time that you do something, that you sign something, or that you write a letter, or that you make a call, that you go to a demonstration, every time you do that, you're doing that, and that's good. And you're also keeping a momentum going. And that momentum actually has, I believe, more value than that specific act. Now that act, of course, has great value, but it's the momentum. It's in particular the sharing of that momentum that allows a growth in beneficial political directions. So please remember that. If you do it, maybe it takes a minute, maybe it takes an afternoon, but it has a value greater than that specific act.
I just thought about attention. How might we practice in a very simple way?
Yeah.
Attention. And we all know servant when they go outside, noticing things in nature, in each other, and being aware of the things that we see and touch and hear and feel in all the realms around us. But there are different ways that we can practice beyond just the observation, and that is the writing that we do, the painting that we do, the physical movement. There's this whole world of expression of our direct experience. And we don't have to go to a class for that.
Yeah, right.
We can practice this daily in between our protests and our demonstrations.
Yeah, great, I love it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, very good. Thank you for that. And it's good to see all of you. Let's keep this practice and this community alive through this week.
So there will be chanting here at 7:15. So you're welcome to stay around for that if you like to.
If you want to help put the chairs back in order, you can do that too.
I wanted to ask you if perhaps it'd be sometime to talk with you about that book, the Breaking the Pains. I've been working on one of my